The boots hit the cold hospital floor long before he ever woke up, heavy, steady, echoing down the hallway like a warning. And everyone at Mercy West Medical Center assumed room 412 held just another sad accident victim. They were completely wrong. When his eyes finally snapped open, he didn't ask for a doctor. He didn't ask where he was. He grabbed the nearest person by the throat and demanded his gun. Rain lashed against the ICU windows, smearing the neon lights of Boston into blurred streaks of red and gold. Nurse Claire Jensen stood in her light blue scrubs, eyes locked on the steady pulse of the heart monitor. It was 3:15 in the morning, the loneliest stretch of her night shift at Mercy West Medical Center for 90 days. This one room had been her entire world. The patient was listed as John Doe, but everyone knew that wasn't the truth. 2 men in charcoal suits stood guard outside the door at all times, silent, watchful, never leaving their post together. Claire picked up a fresh, warm washcloth from the basin. She approached the bed with the same gentle care she gave every patient. But there was an unmistakable heavy feeling surrounding this particular man. His name was Daniel Walsh. She had only found that out by accident. She had overheard a hushed, terrified conversation between the chief of surgery and a broad, shouldered man named Ryan O'Shea, who appeared to be Daniel's second in command. Daniel was the head of the Walsh Syndicate, a notoriously ruthless organized crime family that controlled the eastern seaboard's shipping ports. Yet lying here, stripped of his expensive suits and his terrifying reputation, he just looked like a man fighting a losing battle. He was 32 years old, sharp, striking features that remained handsome despite the pale, waxy color of his skin. Dark hair, thick and slightly curled at the ends, falling over his forehead, a jagged, angry scar slashed across his left collarbone, disappearing beneath the hospital gown, a brutal contrast to the clean white sheets underneath him. "All right, Mr. Walsh," Claire murmured, her voice soft and steady against the sterile hum of the medical machines. She always talked to him. The senior nurses thought she was wasting her breath. They pointed to his low coma score, said there was no one home, but Claire believed in the power of the human voice. "I'm just going to clean your arms now. The storm is pretty bad out there tonight. The Charles River is probably close to overflowing." She gently lifted his right arm, carefully navigating around the Roman 4 lines, feeding him nutrients and antibiotics. His muscles had weakened slightly over 3 months, but his raw, physical power was still visible. Intricate dark ink wrapped around his forearm, a sprawling tattoo of a raven clutching a broken crown. Daniel had been brought in with 2 bullets in his chest and massive head trauma. The local news called it a tragic warehouse collapse. The hospital staff whispered it was an organized hit. He had flatlined twice on the operating table. The surgeon had managed to get the bullets out of his lungs, but the swelling in his brain had forced him into a deep, seemingly permanent coma. "I brought a new book tonight," Claire continued, wiping down his knuckles. They were calloused, the hands of a man who didn't just order violence, but participated in it himself. "I finished the Fitzgerald novel. I thought maybe we could try something a little different, a bit of history. You seem like a man who appreciates strategy." She dried his arm, pulled the thermal blanket up to his chest. Claire had grown up bouncing between foster homes in South Boston, surrounded by chaos and loud, angry voices. There was something deeply calming about the silence in room 412. Daniel was dangerous. She knew that instinctively, but in this comatose state, he was completely helpless, entirely dependent on her care. Over the weeks, something strange had formed quietly inside her chest. She found herself checking his charts even when she was off duty, worrying about his slight fevers, feeling a strange, almost protective feeling when the guards outside switched their shifts. Claire pulled a small, worn paperback copy of The Art of War from her scrub pocket. She pulled up the plastic visitor's chair, sat close to the bed railing. Chapter 1. She read softly, her voice filling the quiet room. The art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. She read to him for an hour. The only interruptions were the occasional sigh of the ventilator and the distant roll of thunder outside. As she read, she watched his face. Sometimes in the low light, she thought she saw a faint twitch in his jaw, a tiny, nearly invisible shift beneath his closed eyelids. The neurologists said it was just automatic reflexes, meaningless electrical misfires in a damaged brain, but Claire wasn't so sure. Sometimes when she held his hand to check his capillary response, the temperature of his skin would spike, like he was burning from inside out, like he was fighting a war no one could see. At 4:30 in the morning, she marked her page, stood up to check his central line. "I'll be back tomorrow night, Daniel," she whispered. She briefly rested her hand on his forehead. "Keep fighting." For one fleeting second, the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor hitched, skipping a single beat before returning to its normal pace. Claire froze. Her eyes darted to the screen. Her own heart slammed against her ribs. She waited, holding her breath. The green line stabilized. Just a glitch, she told herself. Just a machine glitch. She turned and walked out of the room, completely unaware that the countdown to absolute chaos had just begun. Tuesday night arrived with a heavy, suffocating humidity that clung to the hospital hallways like a damp blanket. Claire clocked in at 11:00 p.m., a creeping, unsettled feeling settling in the pit of her stomach. The hospital felt wrong. The usual night shift chatter at the nurse's station was completely gone, replaced by tense whispers and eyes that looked away too fast. When she walked down the west wing toward room 412, the unease in her stomach turned to icy dread. The two men in the charcoal suits were gone. The hallway was completely empty, the silence ringing in her ears. She quickened her pace, pushed open the heavy oak door. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamps filtering through the blinds and the glow of the medical equipment. Daniel lay exactly as she had left him, the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator, the only sound. Claire checked his vitals. Everything was stable. She let out a shaky breath, told herself she was being paranoid. Maybe the guards had stepped down to the cafeteria. Maybe Ryan had called them in for a quick meeting. She began her routine, drew a fresh basin of water. As she turned her back to the door to adjust the thermostat, she heard it, a faint, nearly silent squeak of rubber soles on the floor. The guards aren't supposed to leave their post, Claire said without turning around, assuming one of the suits had come back. No answer. The hair on the back of her neck stood straight up. She slowly turned around. Standing in the doorway was a man in light green hospital scrubs, a blue surgical mask covering the lower half of his face. A standard hospital ID badge clipped to his chest, but the badge was flipped backward, hiding his name, hiding his face, and his eyes, pale, watery, and completely lifeless, were locked entirely on Daniel. "Can I help you?" Claire asked. She took a quiet, careful step to place herself between the stranger and the bed. "This is a restricted room. No orderlies are scheduled for this wing tonight." The man didn't speak. He reached into the deep pocket of his scrubs. When his hand came back out, he wasn't holding a fresh Roman IV bag. He wasn't holding clean towels. He was holding a sleek black syringe filled with a thick, clear liquid. No medical label, not standard hospital equipment. Claire's medical training kicked in instantly. Potassium chloride injected directly into the Roman IV line. It would cause immediate, massive cardiac arrest. It would look exactly like a tragic complication from his injuries. "Hey," Claire shouted, her voice cracking with terror. "Get out of here." She lunged toward the emergency call button on the wall, but the man was terrifyingly fast. He crossed the room in 2 long strides, backhanded her hard across the face. The force of the blow sent her crashing into the tray table. Metal instruments scattered violently across the floor. Pain exploded in her cheekbone. Her vision went dark and spotty. She scrambled backward, tasting blood in her mouth. The fake orderly ignored her completely. His eyes fixed on his target, he stepped up to the bed, uncapped the needle with his teeth, reached for the central line port near Daniel's collarbone. "No!" Claire screamed. She threw herself forward, grabbed the man's wrist, dug her nails into his skin. He snarled, twisted his arm, shoved her hard into the edge of the bed. Claire's ribs slammed into the metal railing. The wind knocked completely out of her lungs. She slumped against the mattress, paralyzed by the pain, gasping. The orderly raised the syringe, aimed it directly at the port, and then the unthinkable happened. The heart monitor, which had been beeping at a slow, steady pace, suddenly began to shriek. Beep, 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 rapid, frantic, alive. Before the man could push the plunger, a large pale hand shot out from beneath the thermal blanket. Long fingers, bruised, bearing the raven tattoo, they clamped down on the orderly's wrist with the crushing force of an industrial vice. The syringe stopped, mere millimeters from the Roman foreport. The orderly froze, his pale eyes going wide with pure, sheer horror. Claire, gasping against the bed rail, looked up. Heart stopped. Daniel Walsh's eyes were open. They were a startling, piercing shade of storm, cloud gray, and they were completely, terrifyingly lucid. There was no confusion, no disorientation of man waking from a 3-month sleep. There was only cold, calculated, violent clarity. The orderly tried to yank his arm back, panic flooding his face, but Daniel's grip was immovable, despite months of muscle loss. The sheer adrenaline surging through the Mafia boss's veins gave him monstrous strength. With a sickening crack, Daniel violently twisted the man's wrist outward. The orderly screamed, dropping the syringe as his bones snapped. Before the attacker could pull back, Daniel used that broken wrist as leverage, hauled his own upper body off the mattress. He moved with the terrifying speed of a striking snake. His other hand shot forward, bypassed the man's throat, grabbed a fistful of his scrub top. With a guttural, terrifying roar, Daniel pulled the man down and drove his own skull forward at the same time. The headbutt echoed through the room like a gunshot. The orderly's nose shattered. His eyes rolled back. He collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, completely unconscious. Silence dropped over the room, except for the frantic, screaming alarm of the heart monitor. Daniel remained sitting up, chest heaving violently beneath the hospital gown. Slowly, he turned his head. His cold, gray eyes locked directly onto Claire, who was still slumped against the side of the bed, trembling so hard she could barely breathe. Her hand pressed against her bruising cheek. For one terrifying second, Claire thought he might come for her next. He looked like a cornered, wild animal. Instead, Daniel reached up with a shaking hand and brutally ripped the oxygen tube from his nose. He coughed, a dry, agonizing sound, clearing his lungs for the first time in 90 days. He leaned over the edge of the bed, his face inches from hers. The smell of sterile alcohol and raw, primal danger radiated off him. "You." His voice was rough, broken, dangerously low, rasping like sandpaper dragged over wood. He didn't ask where he was. He didn't ask what year it was. He grabbed the fabric of Claire's scrub top, not violently, but with an iron grip that made very clear she was not allowed to leave. "Turn off that machine," Daniel commanded, his eyes snapping to the door, "and give me your phone." Now, panic clawed at Claire's throat, but years of chaotic ER shifts forced her hands to steady. She slammed the monitor's master silence button. The shrieking alarm died instantly, leaving only the ragged breathing of the man on the bed and the bleeding, unconscious attacker on the floor. She fumbled for her smartphone. Daniel snatched it from her grasp with terrifying speed, his gray eyes scanning the screen, his trembling fingers dialing a number from pure memory. "It's me," he rasped, a jagged, barely, their whisper. He paused, listening to the explosion of relief on the other end. No names. The hospital is compromised. Room 412 is burned. Bring the black sedan to the loading dock on level C. 5 minutes. Bring an extraction kit. He dropped the phone, immediately reached for the central line port taped to his chest. Stop. Claire hissed, instinctively grabbing his wrist. You'll tear your subclavian vein and bleed out. Your body is in profound shock. Daniel's piercing gaze dropped to her trembling hand on his forearm. He looked back up, the ghost of a terrifying smile playing at the corner of his pale lips. You know who I am. Everyone knows who you are, Claire retorted, still shaking. But right now, you are my patient. You are not removing that line without a sterile pressure dressing. Surprisingly, he released the tube, leaned back against the pillows, his chest still heaving. Then do it fast, he said. Because whoever sent that man will send another one when he misses his check-in. He kicked the unconscious orderly's boot for emphasis. Claire moved with frantic efficiency, clamping the line. Smoothly withdrawing the catheter, applying heavy, immediate pressure to his chest, Daniel didn't flinch, though a sheen of cold sweat covered his skin. You need to hide, Daniel commanded, throwing his legs over the side of the mattress. His knees buckled instantly. He grunted in pain, caught himself on the bed rail. When my people get here, they'll scrub this room. You were never here. I have to call security, Claire argued, taping down the gauze with shaking fingers. Security let him in, Daniel snarled. He forced himself to stand, gripping the Roman four-pole for support. If you call security, you're calling my executioners, and since you just saw that man's face, you're on their list now too. The reality hit her like a physical blow. She had just stopped a professional assassination attempt on the most dangerous man in the city. Her normal life was effectively over. Level C loading dock, Claire said, her voice surprisingly hollow and calm. She pulled oversized surgical scrubs from a nearby closet. We have to go through the basement. The service elevator requires my biometric scan. Daniel studied her face. He saw the terror, but he also saw something underneath it, an iron core of resilience. Get me dressed, he said softly. It was a slow, agonizing process. She supported his heavy frame. He was a furnace of raw heat and suppressed agony. When they finally stepped out of the room, the hallway was eerily, completely deserted. She slipped her arm around his waist. They made their way in a painfully slow three-legged walk toward the service elevator. Claire pressed her thumb to the scanner. The heavy door slid open. They stumbled inside. Daniel leaned heavily against the back wall, eyes closed, breathing shallow and ragged. Why did you do it? He asked suddenly, his voice echoing in the small metal box. You could have let him push that plunger. He opened his eyes, pinned her with a gaze that felt far too close for a hospital elevator. You read Sun Tzu to me. You held my hand. He paused. I heard you. Claire's breath caught in her throat. He heard her. You're my patient, she replied stubbornly, looking away from his intense stare. I save lives. I don't care whose they are. The elevator dinged, opened into the cavernous, dimly lit expanse of level C. Massive industrial washing machines masked the sound of their footsteps as Claire guided him through the maze of laundry carts. As they approached the loading dock doors, two massive figures stepped out of the shadows. Claire gasped. Froze, boss, the taller one said, his voice thick with a heavy accent. He had a jagged scar across his chin. Lord, you look like a ghost. Good to see you too, Marcus, Daniel muttered, his grip on Claire's shoulder tightening. Is the car secure? Armored SUV right outside, Marcus replied, his eyes sliding suspiciously to Claire. Who's she? She's the reason I'm still breathing, Daniel stated, his tone broking absolutely no argument. She comes with us. What? No, Claire protested, trying to pull away. I got you here. We're done. Daniel turned, grabbed both her upper arms, his fading strength backed by an immovable will. Listen to me, he said, his face inches from hers. You go back up there and you are a loose end, they will bury you under the Charles River. You're coming with me until I can guarantee your safety. Understood?" Before she could argue, Marcus pulled the loading dock door open. The biting Boston night air rushed in. A black SUV sat idling in the dark alleyway. Claire had no choice. She let them put her in the back seat, Daniel sliding in close beside her as the armored door slammed shut and the darkness of the interior wrapped around her. Claire understood something with absolute clarity. She had just crossed a line she could never uncross. The SUV tore through the slick, rain-washed streets of Boston, weaving through the industrial back roads. Avoiding the main streets, inside the cabin, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Daniel had slipped into a half-conscious state. His head resting back against the leather seat, his face twisted in pain. "He's burning up," Claire said. She pressed the back of her hand against his forehead. "His body is fighting the sudden adrenaline dump. He needs Roman 4 fluids and antibiotics right now, or he's going to slip back into a coma." "We've got supplies at the house," Marcus grunted from the front seat, his eyes constantly scanning the mirrors. "A private doctor was supposed to be on call. He went dark 2 hours ago. You're going to have to play doctor." They pulled into an abandoned shipyard, the SUV rumbling over old rusted train tracks before slipping inside a massive corrugated metal warehouse. The heavy doors rolled shut behind them. Inside was a well-lit, surprisingly comfortable safe house. Built directly into the warehouse's interior framework, Marcus and the driver helped carry Daniel inside. Laying him on a large leather sofa in the center of the main room, Claire immediately got to work. She found the medical supply box, cracked it open, a military trauma kit that probably cost more than her entire year's salary. She worked fast, starting a new Roman 4 line in the crook of Daniel's arm, hanging a bag of saline from a nearby floor lamp, pushing a heavy dose of antibiotics and a carefully measured amount of painkiller into the port. As she worked, she felt it. His eyes on her, Daniel was watching her every move, his gaze sharp and focused despite the fever clouding his system. "You have very steady hands," he murmured, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. "My name is Claire," she said, not looking up, checking his blood pressure, "and my hands are steady because I'm absolutely terrified. If you die on my watch right now, I'm fairly sure your men will shoot me." "Marcus wouldn't shoot you," Daniel replied, a faint, dark amusement coloring his tone. "He'd probably just lock you in the trunk." "Not funny." Claire pulled the blood pressure cuff off a little harder than needed. She looked down at him, the overhead lights casting deep shadows across the hollows of his cheeks. He was a brutal, violent man. She knew that, but looking at him now, stripped of his empire and his reputation, she felt that same strange, protective pull she had felt in room 412. "I remember the smell of vanilla," Daniel said softly, out of nowhere. Claire froze. She always wore a cheap vanilla body lotion. It was the only thing that masked the smell of hospital bleach. "I remember the sound of pages turning," he continued, his eyes locking onto hers, stripping her bare. "And I remember your voice telling me to keep fighting. Every time I wanted to let go, every time I wanted to just sink into the dark, I heard you." The air in the room suddenly felt incredibly thin. Claire swallowed hard, her heart doing a frantic, erratic flutter against her ribs. This wasn't a mob boss talking to a hostage. This was a man bearing his entire soul to the woman who had kept him tethered to the living world. Before she could find words to respond, the heavy steel door to the safe house clanged loudly, the electronic deadbolts sliding back. Marcus drew his weapon instantly, aiming it at the entrance. Claire scrambled backward, putting the sofa between herself and the door. A tall, broad, shouldered man in a soaking wet charcoal suit stepped into the room. He ran a hand through his dripping blonde hair. His face twisted with visible relief. It was Ryan O'Shea, Daniel's second in command, the man who had been paying the guards outside room 412. "My God, Daniel," Ryan breathed, rushing forward, ignoring Marcus's gun. "When I got the call that the room was empty, I thought they had taken you. I thought you were dead." Daniel struggled to sit up, groaning as his healing muscles protested. "Who pulled the guards, Ryan?" Ryan stopped at the edge of the sofa. His eyes darted to Claire for one split second, then snapped back to his boss. "I did. We got a tip that the Morty family was moving on the South Docks. I needed every gun we had. I thought you were safe. Nobody knew you were in room 412 except the inner circle." "Exactly," Daniel said softly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Nobody knew except the inner circle, yet an orderly with a syringe of potassium chloride walked straight through the front door 10 minutes after you pulled my security detail. Ryan's expression shifted into shocked, offended disbelief. "Are you accusing me, brother? I've bled for this family. I took a bullet for your father." "You did," Daniel agreed. His voice frighteningly calm, "which is why this breaks my heart, Ryan. You got greedy. You wanted the shipping routes for yourself. You're paranoid," Ryan scoffed. "Taking a small step back, the coma scrambled your brain. Did it?" Daniel reached under the blanket Claire had thrown over him. His hand came back out, holding a heavy black Glock. He must have lifted it from Marcus during the car ride. He aimed it directly at Ryan's chest. "When I was in the dark, Ryan, I couldn't move. I couldn't open my eyes, but my hearing was perfect." Ryan went completely still. The color draining from his face, I heard the doctors talking. Daniel continued, his finger resting against the trigger guard. "And I heard you standing next to my bed 2 weeks ago, whispering to someone on the phone. You said, 'Give it another month. If he doesn't die on his own, we'll help him along. I have the board's support.'" Claire gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. The betrayal hung in the air between them. Toxic, suffocating, Ryan's mask of loyalty cracked and fell away. His eyes went cold, calculating. He looked at the gun in Daniel's trembling hand, then at his boss's pale, sweat-soaked face. "You can barely hold that weapon, Daniel," Ryan sneered, his hand drifting slowly toward the inside of his jacket. "You're a ghost. Your time is finished. The syndicate needs a king, not a corpse." "I may be a ghost," Daniel whispered, his grip tightening on the handle, "but I still know how to haunt." Ryan lunged, going for the weapon holstered beneath his suit jacket, calculating that Daniel's weakened state would give him the half-second he needed. He was fundamentally wrong. Daniel might have had the physical strength of a ghost, but his muscle memory was forged in the fires of a brutal, unforgiving underworld. He didn't hesitate. The gun kicked violently in his trembling grip. Bang! The deafening roar echoed off the corrugated metal walls. Ryan staggered backward, a dark crimson bloom spreading rapidly across the crisp white fabric of his dress shirt. Just below his collarbone, he looked down at the wound in absolute disbelief, his eyes wide. "You," Ryan choked, his half-drawn weapon dropping from his fingers onto the concrete floor. His knees buckled. He crashed down hard. Marcus moved instantly, his own weapon leveled at the fallen traitor. "Don't move, Ryan. I swear, the next one goes right between your eyes." Claire scrambled over the back of the leather sofa, both hands pressed over her ears, her breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. She had spent her entire career fighting to stop people from bleeding, guarding the fragile line between life and death. Now she was trapped in a room where death was being dealt on purpose by the man she had just saved. Daniel lowered the gun, his arm dropping to his side like the weapon weighed 1,000 pounds. The burst of adrenaline was burning out fast, leaving behind a hollow, crushing exhaustion, his skin shifting from pale to a terrifying ash gray. Ryan coughed from the floor, a wet, rattling sound. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth. He looked up at Daniel with a wild, bloody grin. "You think I came here alone? You think I didn't track the SUV? The Morty family, they aren't at the South Docks, Daniel. They're outside right now, as if on cue." A massive explosion rocked the foundation of the warehouse. The heavy steel doors groaned. The overhead lights flickered violently, then died completely, plunging the safe house into the eerie, deep red glow of emergency backup lighting. "Move!" Marcus roared. He abandoned Ryan and sprinted toward the reinforced front entrance. Heavy automatic gunfire began raining against the exterior of the building. A terrifying hailstorm of metal and violence echoing through the vast space. Daniel's eyes rolled back. The gun slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor as he collapsed backward onto the sofa. The heart monitor Claire had connected began screaming its warning again. His blood pressure was plummeting fast. His body was going into severe shock from the exertion on top of his previous catastrophic injuries. The surgical sutures on his chest wound were weeping fresh blood, the recoil of the gun tearing at his still, healing flesh. "Daniel," Claire screamed. She dove over the armrest without a single thought for herself. She pressed her fingers to his neck. His pulse was a frantic, barely, their flutter beneath cold skin. "Marcus, he's crashing." She yelled over the deafening roar of gunfire outside. "Fix him," Marcus shouted back, firing through a reinforced gun port in the steel door. "We need to move to the underground tunnel right now. Can you keep him alive long enough?" Claire ripped open the emergency medical kit. No hospital crash cart, no operating room, no team of surgeons. Just her bare hands, a few syringes of epinephrine, and sheer, absolute desperation. She drew up a heavy dose of the cardiac stimulant. Her hands, miraculously, impossibly steady in the middle of everything falling apart around her. "Don't you dare die on me after everything we just went through," she commanded fiercely. She drove the needle into the Roman foreport. "Do you hear me, Daniel? Keep fighting." She climbed onto the sofa, placed her hands over his sternum, and began chest compressions. The physical force tearing at her own bruised ribs from the orderly's earlier attack. 1, 2, 3, 4, she pushed with everything she had. With every compression, flashes of the past 3 months cut through her mind. The quiet nights in room 412, the rain against the window, the way his strong, tattooed fingers felt completely cold in her grasp. She had poured her soul into keeping him connected to the world, and she absolutely refused to let a traitor and a rival mob family cut that cord now. "Breathe, come on," she screamed, her voice cracking wide open with raw, unfiltered emotion. A secondary explosion rocked the eastern wall. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, coating her hair and scrubs in white powder. "Claire!" Marcus roared from his post. "We have 2 minutes before they blow the main hinges. We have to go now." Suddenly, Daniel's chest arched violently beneath her hands. He dragged in a massive, ragged breath, his eyes snapping open wide, the gray irises blown wide with shock and intense, searing pain. He coughed hard, grabbed her wrists with surprising force to stop the compressions. "I'm here," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the relentless gunfire outside. "I'm here. Tunnel, now." Claire choked out, hot tears mixing with plaster dust on her cheeks. She scrambled off him, helped him sit up. Marcus abandoned his post at the door, sprinted over to haul Daniel to his feet. Together, they dragged him toward the back of the safe house. Marcus kicked away a heavy oriental rug, revealing a thick steel grate set into the concrete floor. He hauled it open with a grunt, exposing a dark, narrow staircase going down into the earth. "Down, both of you," Marcus ordered. "I'll rig the door. It'll buy us a head start." Claire practically carried Daniel down the stairs, the damp, musty smell of underground tunnels wrapping around them. They stumbled blindly in the dark until Marcus caught up behind them, a heavy tactical flashlight cutting a path through the black. Above them, a muffled, earth-shaking boom, the safe house destroyed, burying Ryan and every Morty soldier foolish enough to step inside. Under tons of burning concrete and steel, 3 weeks later, the storm that had nearly claimed Daniel Walsh's life had finally broken, leaving behind a new, undisputed king of the Boston underworld. The luxury penthouse overlooking the Charles River was bathed in soft golden evening light. Claire stood on the massive glass balcony, wearing a silk emerald green dress that draped flawlessly over her frame. The severe bruising on her face had faded to a faint shadow, but the internal shifts from that night, those were permanent. She hadn't returned to Mercy West. She couldn't. Daniel had arranged for her entire life to be quietly rewritten. Her small apartment packed up, her resignation filed by expensive lawyers, her safety permanently secured within the walls of the Walsh Syndicate's inner circle. Footsteps sounded softly on the hardwood floor behind her. Claire didn't turn around. She recognized that stride immediately. Daniel stepped onto the balcony. He slid his arms around her waist from behind, drew her close against his chest, buried his face in the crook of her neck. He smelled of rich espresso and expensive fabric. The fever was completely gone. The bandages were off. The man holding her was fully, terrifyingly, magnificently restored. "The Morty family requested a meeting this morning," Daniel murmured, his lips brushing against the pulse point on her neck. "They are surrendering the southern docks. The war is officially over. And Ryan," Claire asked softly, leaning back into his embrace, finding comfort in the solid wall of his chest. Ryan's remains were identified in the warehouse wreckage. He paid the ultimate price for his betrayal. Daniel's grip tightened slightly, his hands resting protectively over her stomach. "My empire is entirely secure, Nightingale. There is no one left to threaten you." Claire closed her eyes, taking in the deep warmth radiating from him. The shift from dedicated hospital nurse to untouchable companion of a Mafia boss had been dizzying, terrifying, and profoundly intoxicating. She had seen the darkest, most violent parts of his world, and yet she had never felt safer in her entire life than she did right now. Wrapped in his arms, Daniel gently turned her to face him, his strong fingers tilting her chin up, forcing her to look into his piercing gray eyes. The cold, calculated predator she had seen wake up in that hospital room was gone. In its place was a man looking at the only woman who had ever truly seen his soul. "I told you I remembered the smell of vanilla," Daniel said softly, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, "and the sound of your voice, but I never told you what kept me fighting when the darkness tried to pull me under for good." "What was it?" Claire whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs, exactly the way it had in room 412. "I needed to see the face of the person who refused to let me die," he replied, his voice a low, rough caress. "I owe you my life, Claire, but more than that, I want to give you the world." He paused, a raw, unguarded vulnerability in his eyes, a stark contrast to everything he was. "If you want to leave, I have a private jet waiting at Logan, a brand new identity, millions in an untraceable account. You will never have to look over your shoulder again." He held her gaze. "But if you stay, You stay by my side, not as a nurse, not as a hostage, as my queen. Claire looked out at the sprawling city below them, the vast, glittering empire that answered to the man standing behind her. She thought about her life before room 412. The endless, exhausting shifts, the quiet loneliness of her small apartment, the solitary existence she had been surviving in, not living. She looked back at Daniel, the pull between them as natural and inevitable as gravity. She reached up, her fingers threading into his dark, thick hair. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, and she pulled his lips down to hers. The kiss was fire and relief, and a sealed promise all at once. Claire Jensen had spent 90 nights keeping a dangerous man tethered to the world. She had no idea she was also stitching herself into it. The quiet nurse from South Boston hadn't just saved the most feared man in the city. She had claimed his heart entirely, and she was ready to rule the shadows by his side.